Oh, don't be so dramatic. Ona. It's just a little bit of peanut butter. You're ruining the mood. That was the last thing I heard before my throat started to squeeze shut like a vice. My father, Frank, loomed over me, holding the half-eaten tart he'd forced down my throat to prove I wasn't a liar. I clawed at the carpet, my vision tunneling into black. Through the haze, I saw my mother, Sarah. She wasn't calling 911. She was signaling the orchestra to play louder to drown out the sound of my dying gasps. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I woke up in a room that smelled of expensive lilies and aggressive sanitation. A private suite. No balloons. No get-well-soon cards. And absolutely no family. Just a man in a charcoal three-piece suit, sitting in the wingback chair, tapping on a tablet. Mr. Sterling. My father's fixer, Miss Vance, he said, not looking up. Good to see you're lucid. We have business. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't mention that 48 hours ago. My own father had force-fed me poison to prove a point to a room full of socialites. He simply reached into his briefcase and slid a thick leather folio onto my bedside table. $50 million, he said. Cash. Diversified stocks. And a blind trust. A complete buyout of your inheritance. Effective immediately. My throat still felt raw, like I had swallowed broken glass. A buyout? Sterling, not a shareholder. In this family, the distinction is negligible, he replied, his voice smooth and terrifyingly bored. The terms are simple. You change your name. You move out of the state. You sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from ever discussing the incident at the engagement party or your medical history. In exchange, you get $50 million and a fresh start. He paused, finally meeting my eyes. If you refuse, the alternative has already been drafted. We release your medical records. We paint a narrative of a troubled, mentally unstable young woman who stages medical emergencies for attention. We will have you committed for psychiatric evaluation. You leave with nothing but a straitjacket. It wasn't a threat. It was a forecast. I looked at the check. $50 million. My hand hovered over the folio. Every instinct in my body screamed to tear it up. To scream. To sue them for attempted murder. But then, the cold reality set in. I was 27. I had $300 in my checking account. They were billionaires about to launch an IPO. If I fought them now, I would be crushed. I would be the crazy girl who ruined the party. I realized then that dignity wasn't a currency I could spend. This isn't giving up, I told myself. The thought crystallizing like ice. This is resupplying to the world. Taking this money would look like I was being paid off to go away. Like I was accepting my shame. But I wasn't accepting it. I was securing the only weapon that matters in their world, capital. I wasn't walking into a prison, I was walking into an armory. They were handing me the knife I would eventually use to cut their throats. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. Smart choice, Sterling said as I signed the death warrant of Una Vance. The funds will be wired within the hour. Goodbye. He walked out, leaving me with $50 million and zero family. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I felt focused. They thought they were buying my silence. They had no idea they were funding their own execution. 3 years later, the glass walls of my office overlooking the Chicago Loop were cold to the touch. Just the way I liked them. My name on the door read, Una Vance, risk assessment analyst. But my clients knew me as something else. The surgeon. I didn't fix companies. I dissected them. I found the rot, the hidden debt, and the fraudulent ledgers that arrogant CEOs thought were buried deep enough. I sat across from a sweating logistics executive who was trying to explain a $40 million discrepancy in his supply chain. I didn't listen to his excuses. I didn't care about his why. I just turned my laptop around to face him. "You're laundering money through a shell company in the Caymans," I said, my voice flat. "I traced the digital footprint in 12 minutes. You have two options: resign and liquidate your assets to pay back the shareholders. Or I send this PDF to the SEC. You have 60 seconds to decide." He crumbled. They always did. Men like him, men like my father, thought power was a shield. They forgot that data is a spear. And I had spent the last 1,000 days sharpening mine. I wasn't just working for high-end corporate clients. I was working on my own project. For 3 years. I hadn't touched a cent of that $50 million settlement for personal luxury. I lived in a modest apartment. I drove a reliable sedan. Every dollar of that settlement had been leveraged, invested, and multiplied. I wasn't just wealthy anymore, I was a financial force. My portfolio now sat at $120 million, but more importantly, I had used my resources to buy something far more valuable than stocks: debt. Specifically, Frank Vance's debt. My father's real estate empire looked golden from the outside, a monument to his ego. But I knew the truth. I'd been tracking his financials for 18 months. He was over-leveraged. He had bet everything on a massive new development in the South Loop, borrowing against his existing properties to fund it. And the lenders he borrowed from? They were aggressive. High-interest shadow banks. Banks that were happy to sell their high-risk loan portfolios to a mysterious, cash-rich investment firm. My firm. I now owned 40% of my father's debt. I could call in his loans at any moment. I could crush him with a single email. But that wasn't enough. Financial ruin was too easy. I needed moral ruin. I needed to know why. Why was I the scapegoat? Why was $50 million the price of my exile? Where did they even get that kind of liquidity when I knew their assets were tied up in real estate? I dug deeper. I hired forensic accountants and private investigators. I audited old family records. And then, late one Tuesday night, the pieces clicked into place. I found the smoking gun. It was a medical file from 4 years ago. My grandmother, Eleanor, she had passed away from natural causes just weeks before my engagement party incident. Or so we were told. But looking at the timeline, the math didn't add up. I pulled up the insurance documents I had unearthed. Her life insurance policy, a massive premium policy, paid out exactly $52 million. The payout date was 3 days before Mr. Sterling walked into my hospital room. I pulled up the coroner's report I had commissioned. The toxicology screen showed traces of a sedative that wasn't on her prescription list. A sedative that, in high doses, mimics heart failure in the elderly. And the signature authorizing the cremation before a full autopsy could be performed? Sarah Vance. My mother. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Colder than the air conditioning. They didn't just pay me off with family money. They paid me off with blood money. They had accelerated my grandmother's death to get the cash liquidity they needed to save the company and silence me. They killed the matriarch to pay off the scapegoat. I closed the laptop. My hands weren't shaking. My breathing was steady. The rage I felt wasn't hot, it was absolute zero. They thought they had buried their secrets along with me. But they forgot one thing. I audit bodies for a living, and now, the audit was finished. It was time for collections. The invitation arrived in a heavy cream envelope with gold lettering. Delivered by courier to the P.O. Box of Shadow Capital Group. The Vance Family Foundation inaugural gala. I held the card in my gloved hands, running my thumb over the embossed calligraphy. It was a black tie event at the Art Institute of Chicago. The irony was suffocating. My parents, who had chemically induced their own mother's heart failure to secure an insurance payout, were launching a charity foundation. They were arrogant. That was their fatal flaw. They believed I was gone, vanished into some drug-addled obscurity, or living a quiet, shameful life somewhere in the Midwest. They felt safe. Safe enough to invite their largest, most mysterious creditor to the gala as a guest of honor. They wanted to charm this shadow capital group that held 40% of their debt. To bring this silent partner into the fold before their IPO. They had no idea they were sending a VIP pass to their executioner. I accepted the invitation. I RSVP'd for one. I spent the morning of the gala visiting the cemetery. My grandmother, Eleanor, was buried in a simple plot in a quiet corner, far away from the ostentatious mausoleum my parents had built for themselves. The grass was overgrown. They hadn't visited. They had cashed the check and moved on. I knelt down, brushing dried leaves off the cold stone. I remembered something then. A memory I hadn't visited in years because it used to hurt too much. I was 10 years old, sitting in my grandmother's kitchen while my parents argued about money in the hallway. Eleanor had grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly tight, her eyes wide with a fear I didn't understand at the time. "Be careful of them, Ona," she had whispered, pressing a small, heavy locket into my palm. "They love things, not people. I stay because I'm the only thing standing between you and their greed. But never let them know your true worth, or they'll try to sell it." I hadn't understood her then. I thought she was just being old and dramatic. But now, kneeling in the dirt, the pieces clicked into place. She wasn't eccentric. She was a hostage. She knew exactly what they were capable of. She stayed to protect me. And the moment they needed liquidity, they liquidated her. "I hear you now, Grandma," I whispered to the grass. "And I'm going to make sure everyone else hears you too." I stood up and walked back to my car. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline purpose. I had a gala to attend. I drove back to my penthouse to prepare. I wasn't going to blend in. I wasn't going to be the shy, allergic girl in the corner trying not to cause a scene. I chose a dress that was a weapon. Sharp architectural lines, deep crimson, structured like armor. I pulled my hair back tight, exposing my face. My makeup was severe. I looked in the mirror. The eyes staring back weren't the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a predator entering a pen of sheep. I grabbed my clutch. Inside, there was no lipstick or compact, just a USB drive containing the forensic audit, the security footage, and the coroner's report. I walked out the door, the sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor, echoing like a countdown. The gala was a masterpiece of deception. The Great Hall of the Art Institute had been transformed into a glittering palace of champagne towers and self-congratulation. The air smelled of expensive perfume and moral rot. I stood in the shadows of a large Greek statue, watching my family perform. My father, Frank, stood at the center of the room, holding court. He looked every inch the benevolent patriarch, his hand resting paternally on the shoulder of a senator. Hannah, my sister, was by his side, laughing that polished, empty laugh, accepting compliments on a charity she did absolutely nothing to build. She was glowing, basking in the light of being the only child left standing. And Sarah, my mother, was working the room with the skill of a seasoned politician. I moved closer, blending into the crowd. My hearing focused on her voice. I needed to hear the lie. I needed to hear exactly how they had erased me. I watched her pull a reporter aside near the hors d'oeuvres. "It's so tragic," Sarah was saying, dabbing a dry eye with a silk handkerchief. "Our other daughter, Ona, we tried everything. Rehab, therapy, financial support. But the addiction, it just took her." I felt a cold smile touch my lips. Addiction. That was the narrative. It was perfect. It explained the absence, garnered sympathy, and discredited me in advance if I ever resurfaced. She ran away years ago, Sarah continued, her voice trembling just the right amount. We pray for her every day. But some souls just can't be saved. The reporter nodded sympathetically, scribbling down the lies in his notepad. You're so brave to channel that pain into this foundation, he said. We do what we must. Sarah sighed, touching his arm. We just want to protect other families from that kind of heartbreak. That's why the Vance Family Foundation is so important to us. It was a masterclass. She was spinning my absence, an absence she mandated, paid for, and legally enforced, into a marketing tool. She was monetizing her own cruelty. The crowd ate it up. They looked at Frank and Sarah with adoration. The noble sufferers, the philanthropists. I stepped out from behind the statue. I didn't rush. I walked straight through the center of the room. The crimson dress cut through the sea of black tuxedos and pastel gowns like a fresh wound. The fabric was structured, sharp, aggressive. I wasn't wearing jewelry, I was wearing armor. People turned. The low hum of conversation faltered, then died. The silence spread outward from my path like a ripple in freezing water. Frank saw me first. He was mid-laugh. His smile froze, then shattered. He blinked, as if trying to clear a hallucination. He looked at his glass, wondering if he'd had too much scotch. Sarah turned, following the sudden hush of the room. Her eyes landed on me. Her face went slack, the color draining out of it until she looked like a wax figure, melting under heat. The handkerchief fell from her hand. I stopped 10 feet away from them. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stood there, letting them see me. Letting them see that the addict looked healthier, wealthier, and more dangerous than anyone else in the room. Frank recovered first. It was impressive. Really. He plastered a tight, fake smile on his face and started moving toward me, his hands up in a placating gesture. But his eyes were hard, scanning the room for security. Ona. Sarah hissed, rushing to intercept me before I could reach the donors. Her voice was low, venomous, pitched so only I could hear. What are you doing here? You signed a contract. You're trespassing. I was invited, I said, my voice calm, carrying just enough to be heard by the senator standing nearby. The Shadow Capital Group sent their representative. Sarah stopped cold. Her eyes darted between my face and my dress. You? Me. Frank reached us, grabbing my elbow hard enough to bruise. He leaned in, his breath smelling of aged whiskey and fear. You need to leave. Now. Before you embarrass us. Embarrass you? I looked down at his hand on my arm. I pulled my arm free with a sharp, violent jerk. I haven't even started. I walked past them. I didn't head for the exit. I headed straight for the stage. The walk to the podium felt like walking across the surface of the moon, silent, weightless, and entirely separate from the atmosphere of the room. Frank started to lunge forward. A desperate, animalistic movement. But Hannah grabbed his arm, hissing something about cameras. She was still trying to save the optical illusion of the perfect family. She didn't realize the theater was already burning. I climbed the 3 steps to the stage. The foundation's director, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had been midway through a toast, stepped back, confused by my presence, but intimidated by my energy. I took the microphone from his hand. It wasn't a request. I tapped the mic. The sound echoed through the cavernous hall, a sharp thud that silenced the last few whispers near the back. Hundreds of eyes fixed on me. Donors, senators, the elite of Chicago. I looked down at my parents. Frank was vibrating with rage, his face a mottled purple. Sarah was gripping the tablecloth so hard her knuckles were white. her eyes wide and wet, pleading silently for me to stop. But mercy wasn't on the agenda. Tonight was about accountability. "Good evening," I said. My voice was steady, amplified, filling every corner of the room. "My name is Una Vance. You might know me from my mother's interviews as the lost daughter, the addict, the tragedy." I paused. I let them look at me clear-eyed, sharp, terrifyingly sober. "But I'm not here to talk about tragedy. I'm here to talk about investments. Specifically, the investment my parents made 3 years ago to ensure I wouldn't be standing here today." I pulled a small, sleek remote from my clutch. I had bribed the AV technician an hour ago $10,000 to plug my laptop into the main projector. A small price for total control. I clicked the button. The massive projection screen behind me, which had been displaying the tasteful gold logo of the Vance Family Foundation, flickered and changed. A video appeared. It was grainy. High-angle security footage. Time-stamped 3 years ago. But the image was unmistakable. It showed a party. A younger, softer version of me, writhing on the floor, clawing at my throat. It showed Frank standing over me, not helping, but looking annoyed, checking his watch. It showed Sarah turning her back to signal the band to play louder. It showed them laughing with a senator while their daughter suffocated 6 feet away. A collective gasp ripped through the room. It sounded like the air being sucked out of an airlock. "This is the care my parents provide," I said, my voice cutting through the shock. "They didn't save me. They watched me die. And when I survived, they decided I was too expensive to keep around." I clicked the remote again. The screen changed. A document appeared, a complex web of financial transfers and a property deed. "You're all sitting in the Great Hall, believing you are guests of Frank Vance," I continued, pointing to the screen. "But Frank doesn't own this night. He doesn't own his company. And he doesn't own the building across the street." I zoomed in on the signature line at the bottom of the deed. "Shadow Capital Group. As of this morning, all of these properties belong to Shadow Capital Group, which is wholly owned by me." Frank let out a strangled noise, a sound of pure financial emasculation. He slumped into his chair. The donors were exchanging horrified looks, realizing the man they were about to give millions to was destitute. "My father has a habit of borrowing money he can't pay back," I said, my tone clinical, like I was reading a quarterly report. "And I have a habit of collecting bad debt." I clicked the remote a third time. This was it. The kill shot. The screen filled with a scanned document. A coroner's report. Next to it, a toxicology screen. And next to that, a life insurance payout slip. The dates were highlighted in red neon, but money wasn't enough. I said. My voice dropped an octave. The cold irony was gone, replaced by the weight of the grave. They needed liquidity. They needed $50 million to buy my silence and save their IPO. And they knew exactly where to get it. I looked directly at Sarah. She had her hands over her mouth, shaking violently. "This is the toxicology report for Eleanor Vance, my grandmother, your matriarch." I read the numbers aloud. The lethal dosage of sedatives found in her system, sedatives that were not prescribed to her, but were prescribed to Sarah Vance. They didn't just pay me off with family money, I told the room, measuring every syllable. They paid me off with blood money. They accelerated her death. They killed their mother to buy off their daughter. And tonight, they wanted you to donate to their charity in her name. The room wasn't just silent now, it was dead. It was a vacuum. The horror was physical. People were backing away from the head table, as if Frank and Sarah were contagious. "They killed her," I repeated, letting the words hang there, heavy and suffocating. "And they thought $50 million was a fair price for a human life." I looked down at them one last time. They weren't titans of industry. They weren't socialites. They were murderers in rented clothes. I suggest you hold on to your wallets, I told the crowd, clicking the remote off and plunging the room into darkness. Because the police are already at the doors. The wail of sirens cut through the heavy silence of the room. Growing louder. Closer. The doors to the great hall burst open. Not with guests, but with uniformed officers. They didn't look at me. They walked straight toward the head table. Frank tried to run. It was a pathetic, stumbling attempt that ended before he even reached the exit. 2 officers grabbed him, forcing his hands behind his back. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was louder than any applause he had ever received. Sarah didn't run. She collapsed. She sat on the floor in her couture gown, weeping. Not for her mother. Not for me. But for the humiliation. You can't do this. She sobbed as an officer pulled her up. Do you know who we are? We know exactly who you are. Ma'am, the officer said. That's the problem. I watched them. Without their money, without the shield of their reputation. They weren't titans. They were just small, scared people. The dignity they projected was never real. It was a costume rented with stolen money. And now that the account was frozen, the costume was gone. Hannah stood alone, her golden child status evaporating in real time. Her fiancé, Gregory, was already backing away, unbuttoning his tuxedo jacket, looking at her like she was a stranger. He was doing the math assets versus liabilities, and Hannah was now a massive liability. She turned to me, her face twisted in a mask of ugly rage. You ruined everything, she screamed, her voice cracking. You jealous, spiteful little witch. You ruined our lives. I looked at her. I looked at the parents being dragged away in cuffs. I looked at the crowd of friends who were already pulling out their phones to distance themselves on social media. I didn't ruin it. Hannah, I said, my voice calm enough to freeze water. I just audited it. I turned my back on them. I walked off the stage, past the frozen waiters, past the shocked elite of Chicago. No one stopped me. No one dared to speak to me. I walked out the front doors into the cool night air. Later that night, I sat in a small, 24-hour diner on the edge of the city. A plate of eggs and toast sat in front of me. Simple. Safe. No peanuts. No poison. I took a pen from my bag and signed the final document on the table. It was the transfer order. The Vance family estate. The liquidated assets of Frank's company. Everything I had seized, it was all being moved into a trust. The Eleanor Vance Foundation for Victims of Medical Abuse. I wasn't keeping their blood money. I was cleaning it. I checked my phone. One new text message from an unsaved number. I knew it was Hannah. Probably borrowing a phone to scream at me one last time. I didn't read it. I hit delete. Then I blocked the number. I looked out the window at the city lights. For the first time in 31 years, the air filling my lungs felt completely clear. No obstruction. No tightness. Just breath. I took a bite of my toast. It tasted like freedom. If this story satisfied that itch for justice, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to know they aren't alone. Subscribe for more stories of people taking their power back.